Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I rise to propose the amendment in myself and Councillor Huxtable's name. And while I appreciate the ruling group might not like everything I say over the next 7 minutes, I would urge you to have a proper look at the detail of this amendment, because actually there is a real ticking time bomb facing the council here if this isn't resolved as an issue. The key point our amendment to the motion starts to talk about is about the upcoming carbon emissions trading scheme. Now, this is something we've been raising over the last year. The government are planning to roll this out to cover waste incineration in 2028. Now, the LGA have identified that that is going to cost councils who've got incinerators around 747 million from 2028 onwards. The cost of Birmingham, therefore, would be about 20 million a year and rising from 2028. And that is something the council currently is not budgeting for, and as we all know, doesn't have, because the budget is already running at a deficit over the next 4 years of 360-odd million. So this is an issue that desperately needs to be resolved before it comes into legislation. Hence us bringing this motion here today, calling on the administration to actually write to the government, asking them not to extend the carbon emissions trading scheme to cover local government incineration of waste, and to provide support for alternative systems going forward. It also highlights the issue of recycling collections not having taken place in the city since January under the bin strike, and not only calling on the council to restart those recycling collections, but also importantly calls on the council, when it does restart those collections, to clear the backlog in people's recycling bins. There are a number of places in the city where people's recycling bins have been out on the street, sometimes for months since the last collection, and through no fault of the resident, those bins have become contaminated from waste being dropped in those bins by people passing by. Under the current rules, the council will never empty that bin until the resident has gone through it bit by bit and taken out all the contamination. That's clearly not viable, and if we want to get the city back recycling, those bins are going to need to be emptied to create a clean slate, and I urge the administration to do that. Of course, the situation we're in with the incinerator wouldn't have happened if the council hadn't re-procured its 25-year contract too late. And as we know from previous debates in this council, it was forced to do a 2-year extension, then a 3-year extension of that 2-year extension, and then renewed it for a further 10 years after that, meaning it would have been in place 40 years after it was originally signed for. And of course, it's quite interesting, because at the time of that, when we called in that decision, I highlighted that actually I was taught at school about how bad the contract for the incinerator was, as an example of local governments failing to procure properly. And the irony is that years later, the council then failed to re-procure its replacement properly, causing the council to keep it running at a higher cost, rising to 4.5 million additional by 24-25 a year, plus an additional 2 million a year of contingency. But outages had to be provided, repeating the failed procurement mistakes of the 1990s, back in 2019 when this was finally re-procured. And it's important because of the fact that technology is now 40 years old. And of course, this is why it was such a bad example of locking the council in to a technology at a time when the technology was changing, and again has done the same now. So we could have been putting in much better technology, even if the council had wanted to continue along incineration, and failed to do that, and that is now having a significant impact. It also should be noted that at the Cabinet meeting where that was actually agreed, Councillor Majid Mahmood, who was then in the Cabinet and is now back in the Cabinet right now, was keen to push the blame onto officers for that failure to re-procure it properly back in 2019, particularly highlighting the high turnover in officers. But of course, that will sound all too familiar to people in this organisation. Political elected Cabinet members blaming officers, blaming changing in officers for the failure to do things correctly. Indeed, we could ask the 3 statutory officers who brought forward the Section 114 and Section 5 notices if that rang familiar to them. But of course we can't, because none of them are here anymore, because they're the people who left, not the political administration who made the votes to determine to bankrupt the City Council. The other key thing to pick up about recycling, of course, is the fact that the recycling rate in the city is a disgrace. When this administration came in, it had a recycling rate that was roughly the level of core city averages, that had a pilot in place for a recycling reward scheme that was increasing recycling by a third. That was scrapped by the administration. After a falling recycling rate for the first few years, the administration in 2017 voted to introduce WACO officers as part of that 2017 bin strike deal. That officer was meant to increase recycling by 4% a year. So it's 26% in 2017, 4% a year it was going to go up from WACO officers. For those doing the maths, that means if that had worked, right now the recycling rate in the city would be 62%. The recycling rate in the city before the strike was 22%. Officers brought in specifically in a role under a 2017 bin strike deal. I can see the leader looking puzzled. I'm not surprised he's puzzled by that detail, because of course in answer to A1, we can see that the leader is confirming, in effect, that he didn't read the report from 2017 that his name is on, because he refused to confirm whether he did, and indeed says his role was not the detail of the report. I would like to think anyone who went on to become cabinet member responsible for things around equal pay and went on to be the leader of the council would indeed read such detailed cabinet reports as the one that is the cause of all of the financial problems in this city. And it perhaps sums up exactly why the administration like to blame officers instead of accepting responsibility. If they're unable to read the detailed reports that explain why it's their responsibility for the mess that this council has got into. I'd urge the cabinet member, even if he doesn't agree with our amendment today, to take up this issue with the government, because if the ETS system is rolled out to waste incineration in the city, that is going to be another financial millstone around the neck of the council that can barely afford it at a time that the council is still bankrupt 2 years after the Section 114 notices and still has a £360 million deficit on its budget.
Thank you, Councillor Alden. I call upon Councillor